Imagine making a superhero movie so bad that it killed an entire cinematic universe. Well, Sony executives apparently didn't have to imagine now that the numbers are out for KRAVEN, which crashed out in theaters, effectively putting an end to their Venom universe. Today, we review this ecological disaster of a movie to figure out what went wrong. Spoiler, it's everything. Before we clap on KRAVEN, let's first talk about Sony's obsession with making Spider-Man movies without, Spider-Man. This is the same studio that gave us Venom, fun but flawed. Venom, Let There Be Carnage, less fun, still flawed, and Morbius, a TikTok punchline. They've treated Spider-Man's rogues gallery like a patchwork quilt, stitching together standalone stories while ignoring the single unifying thread, Spider-Man himself. His absence weakens these films because Spider-Man isn't just a supporting element, he's the entire catalyst that defines these villains' motives and relationships. Without him, their narratives feel directionless and disconnected from what made them compelling in the first place. So, how did we get here? Apparently, the studio learned the wrong lessons when the first Venom movie came out, thinking that, due to its success without him, that audiences didn't want Spider-Man in their spin-off villain movies. Oh, I know. I thought the same thing. The craziest part? They could have put Tom Holland's Spider-Man in literally any of their movies, but simply chose not to based on a very wrong assumption by Sony execs. Insiders even claim Sony had access to around 900 different characters spanning across the C and D level rosters, and their original plan was just to keep cranking them out solo. I think what infuriates people the most is that Sony's proven it can make a great Spidey movie with Beyond the Spider-Verse, which was presented as the first part of a two-part finale. Even though they've been making part 2, Sony announced it would be delayed indefinitely due to a handful of obstacles, including the 2023 writers and actors strike. But we're still hopeful for the live-action Spider-Man noir starring the one and only Nicolas Cage. So why is Sony still trying? It's because they're desperate to prove they've learned their lessons and can offer a genuine cinematic universe without having to constantly team up with Marvel's Kevin Feige, who's probably somewhere rolling his eyes so hard he's seeing alternate universes. In trying to turn villains into anti-heroes, Sony has forgotten what makes them compelling: their connection to Spider-Man. Without Peter Parker to anchor these characters, their motivations and arcs often feel hollow. After watching KRAVEN, we think there are 5 areas of failure that Sony can learn from. In the comics, Sergei Kravinoff is a big game hunter obsessed with proving his superiority to Spider-Man. He's brutal, calculated, and often unhinged, which makes him such a worthy adversary. Sony's version? A vegan animal rights activist who communes with lions like he's Simba. I think I'll just let that rest for a second. Fans and critics alike roasted this scene, with one review calling it the most ridiculous origin story since Halle Berry's Catwoman. Critics didn't hold back either. One review quipped, "Instead of the KRAVEN you know and loathe, you get the swaggering pelvic thrust of Aaron Taylor Johnson posing as every mammal in the animal kingdom." Now, the second area is honestly the script. The dialogue in KRAVEN feels like it was ripped from a rejected TV show on the CW. Critics pointed out that it oscillated between self-serious and unintentionally hilarious, leaving the audience confused about what kind of R-rated movie this even is. A particularly egregious example here was the family subplot, where KRAVEN spent much of the movie feuding with his father, who's depicted as a generic evil trophy hunter. Their relationship felt like it was pulled from a bad telenovela, with none of the emotional weight or connection necessary to make viewers believe it, let alone care. One fan's viral tweet summed it up perfectly. KRAVEN the Hunter feels like it was written by someone who skimmed the Wikipedia page for comic books and called it a day. For the third area, we chose its CGI. The effects in KRAVEN range from poorly visualized animal attacks to a final boss scene that looks like it was rendered on a PlayStation 3. The graphics failed to immerse viewers like other superhero films. Compare this to Black Panther or even The Batman, where action scenes and effects actually elevate the story. In KRAVEN, the CGI honestly lowered the experience for me. My least favorite part of the movie was when they introduced their version of the Rhino, except this version wasn't a guy in a mechanical suit, it's a dude who literally transformed into a rhino. Fans were left scratching their heads, as one Redditor quipped, "Did Sony just put Animorphs in the Spider-Man universe?" The fourth area was budget, but not the way you think. Insiders reported that Sony knew the quality of the past several movies was poor, think Madam Web level quality, but didn't care enough to spend more money on reshoots. They honestly thought that fans would let it slide and now are paying for it in a much worse way. Here's why. The cost to produce Kraven was reported to be $110 million, while it only made $11 million opening weekend. The R-rated action flick came in under the disastrous Madam Web, which brought in $15.3 million during its launch weekend earlier this year, as well as all the Venom movies and 2022's Morbius, which made $39 million. If that wasn't enough, the last area was its rating. Sony hyped Kraven as an R-rated action film, but the execution didn't live up anywhere close to what was promised. The trailer teased blood-soaked carnage, but the actual movie felt oddly sanitized, like it couldn't decide whether to embrace its darker tone fully. This inconsistency alienated potential viewers who expected something grittier and more daring, while the R rating restricted its audience artificially without any payoff for either party. As a simple comparison, the release of Deadpool and Wolverine in 2024, which is also an R-rated superhero movie, made $200 million more than Kraven did on opening weekend. The difference? Kraven failed to capitalize on the benefits that come with such a restrictive audience rating. Deadpool and Wolverine just jump face first into him, and the rest is history.
Till you're 90.
So, what should Sony do before launching their next cinematic universe? Well, it's clear they didn't study the success stories of absolute bangers like the R-rated Deadpool movie series or Logan closely enough. Here's why. For one, both Deadpool and Logan knew exactly who their target audiences were. Deadpool leaned heavily into irreverent humor, breaking the fourth wall and embracing the character's over-the-top violence and raunchiness. To viewers, it felt fresh and stood in a league of its own against all the other superhero movies out there while staying authentic to the source material we all know and love. Meanwhile, Logan offered a deeply emotional, gritty, and honorable farewell to Hugh Jackman's Wolverine, which resonated with both new and longtime fans of the character. Here, it was presented as an end to an entire era and farewell worthy of such a beloved comic book character who graced the big screen for nearly 2.5 decades. Both these films understood that their success depended on making audiences actually care about their leads. In deep contrast, Kraven seemed confused about its tone and audience. The attempt to straddle the line between an edgy action flick and a more traditional superhero movie left it feeling rudderless and adrift. In trying to cater to everyone, the movie ended up catering to no one, which the opening weekend box office numbers confirm. Fans who came for the promised R-rated brutality of a well-known villain left disappointed by its half measures. Perhaps worse yet, potential new fans couldn't even connect with the reimagined anti-hero Sony was trying to sell. Without a strong central character like Spider-Man to rally around, the movie's flaws become impossible to ignore. Another thing is Deadpool cleverly expanded the X-Men universe with humor and nods to the larger Marvel world, while Logan created an intimately local post-apocalyptic setting that heightened the storyline stakes. Even though both films stood on their own, they still felt connected to a larger story. Kraven, on the other hand, struggled to establish its place in the existing Sony Spideyverse. Its vague references to other characters and lackluster world building made it feel disjointed, almost like an afterthought forced to fit somewhere it doesn't belong, rather than a crucial piece of a much larger puzzle. And finally, the marketing campaigns for Deadpool and Logan were masterclasses in setting audience expectations. Deadpool embraced its irreverent tone in trailers, while Logan's use of Johnny Cash's Hurt playing with a worn-down Wolverine staring at his reflection in a dilapidated mirror perfectly set the stage for his emotional farewell. In contrast, Kraven promised an R-rated spectacle, but delivered a film that couldn't commit to its own darkness. What do you think? Have they learned their lesson, or will they show up in 6 months like a bad boyfriend on that same old blueprint? Maybe, just maybe, this will be Sony's last superhero hunt. But only if we're lucky. I swear, if y'all don't stop playing with the source material,